Here we go on the lymphatic system and the lymphoids. Real quick, this is often called the immune system, which is an incorrect term. You don't have a physical immune system. This is the structural part of what we call an immune system, but there's no true immune system. The immune system is a conglomeration of a lot of things working together. So there's a difference between the lymphatics and the immune system, per se. Okay? The function of the lymphatic system is to take anything that has leaked out of the blood and is in your tissue back. So it picks up things that shouldn't be there any longer, and it brings it back. If it was in your blood, the veins would have brought it back. But since it's outside of your vessels and it's kind of in that tissue, the lymphatics will bring it back. The lymphatic vessels will eventually cleanse it out and dump it right back into your blood. So we call it lymph when it's in a lymphatic vessel. It becomes blood once it dumps right back into the heart. Okay? So lymph runs right alongside, lymphatic vessels run right alongside the veins. We saw that in the previous chapter. And it will dump right back into the heart. So while it's in the lymphatic vessels, we call it lymph, and eventually it will be right back into the heart, which will make it blood. You'll hear lymphatic vessels, which we reference as lymphatics. Lymph is the actual fluid, and many of you have probably heard lymph nodes, and we're going to discuss their structure today and how they function to cleanse the lymph before it makes it back to the blood. Here it mentions here that the lymphatic system provides the structural basis of the immune system. So this is the physical structure of what people call your immune system. So lymphatics is not your immune system, and your immune system is not a specific system. The lymphatic system houses phagocytic cells and lymphocytes. Recall, please, that lymphocytes are a type of leukocyte. Leukocyte means that they're white blood cells. Lymphocytes, we had two types, T and B, which we're going to bring up here. Okay? The structures of the lymphatic system include the spleen, the thymus, the tonsils, and other lymphoid tissues. Lymphatic vessels. Everywhere that we see them, they're going to be depicted in green. And they return interstitial fluid. What does interstitial mean again? This is throwback to the first lecture we had together. In between cells. So interstitial just means it's in between. It's not specifically in a destination. It's kind of just hanging out in that open area. So it returns that leaked out fluid back to the blood circulation. You have approximately 3 liters processed each day. Once it enters the lymphatics, it is called lymph. When it dumps back into the heart, it is now called blood. So this is a positional term that tells you if it's in the lymph, we know it's in the lymphatic system. If it's in the blood, it's no longer the lymphatic system. Although the contents can be in both places. Here, I have a capillary bed, and you can see that it is laced in green. The green indicates to me that those are lymphatics, or lymphatic vessels. They are going to pick up anything that has leaked out of that blood circulation. It could be plasma proteins, it could be extra fluid, it could be antigens or bacteria, it could be a lot of different things, but it leaked out, and it is not in the actual capillaries, because then it would have been in circulation, but it is in that tissue, and it's going to be picked back up. You can see an up-close look here, that there are valves. These valves are pressure valves. So when the pressure outside of this vessel is stronger than the pressure inside, it forces that flap open, and it allows that fluid to leak into here. Then when the pressure in here is higher than out here, it'll shut it so that it keeps it in there. So we see the valves very much like we saw in the veins, and they work on pressure. So if there's swelling in an area, that swelling is going to put pressure on these valves to cause them to take up that fluid. Okay? Also, the main reason why if there's swelling in your peripheral appendages, we don't want you to keep standing. Why do we want you to elevate? Why do we want you to elevate your foot or your arm? To get it back to the heart. Because there's no pumping mechanism. So we're going to need gravity to work with us in that case. Okay? So anytime there's swelling or edema in our distal appendages, we're going to, like if you break your arm, they're always going to have you kind of do this or kind of sleep with it over your head. And that's to help gravity. If it's your legs, they're going to keep your leg elevated so that's making its way back. Because if it's broken or injured, you're probably not putting weight on it, so those muscles are probably not contracting. And we see that principle playing a role both in the veins and the lymphatics. Lymphatics are a one-way system, just like the veins. They flow towards the heart. They go in this order. Lymphatic capillaries are the smallest. Then we have the lymphatic vessels. Then they will dump into the trunks, and eventually the ducts. So it goes capillaries, vessels, trunks, ducts. Smallest to largest. It mentions here that they're similar to the lymphatic capillaries. They're similar to blood capillaries, except they're far more permeable. What does that mean? They allow a lot more things to come through. Okay, they're not just specific to macrophages or whatever. They will allow pretty much anything extra that couldn't be picked up in the blood to come through. They are anchored in place by collagen filaments, and I'll show you again whenever it shows that diagram. And what opens and closes these valves is the ECF, extracellular fluid. So if the extracellular fluid, that pressure is high, it pushes those valves open and allows for that fluid to go inside. Pathogens will travel throughout the body via lymphatics. What's a pathogen? A pathogen, by definition, is a disease-causing agent. A disease-causing agent is what we call a pathogen. Okay? Lymphatic capillaries. They're going to be pretty much everywhere. It mentions that they are absent from bones, teeth, bone marrow, and what's the CNS? Central nervous system. Lacteals. You'll hear the term lacteals only when we're talking about the intestines. So lacteals are specific lymphatic vessels that are found in the small intestines. They allow us to absorb fats. So lacteals. And it mentions that they're present in the intestinal mucosa. Yes, for fats. Here is that bottom picture I showed you just a moment ago, just really magnified. So you can see that the detail, you can see the valves, and here are the anchoring filaments. These are holding them in place. Those are collagenous, so holding them in place. So this will push open, and it'll shut based on the fluid, the extracellular fluid that's found around that lymphatic vessel. Again, very permeable, extremely permeable. That's pretty much anything that can't get into the blood vessels in here. Okay? Any type of interstitial fluid, proteins, whatever. On this slide, it references how those vessels are taken care of. It mentions that they have valves very similar to the veins. They do anastomoses more frequently. What's anastomoses again? Like where they have multiple pathways. Okay? So those vascular and arterial, or venous and arterial anastomoses. They travel along the veins. The deep ones are along the aorta, so that's what it says. So we have some in our core, in our trunk. Well, we have them all over. But in our core, that's going to be towards our aorta, much more deep. Okay? But not necessarily traveling in the same direction. It's just saying that it's next to them. The nutrients for our lymphatics are supplied by the vasa vasorum. What's that again? The vasa vasorum is the vessels that serve the vessels. It's the vessels that serve those vessels. Okay, we heard that when we talked about the arteries and veins. I mentioned there was the yellow, red, and blue. And I said, they're not the ones that transport it. They're serving the ones that transport it. Okay, so we have that same nutrient supply there for those lymphatics. Where are we going to find our lymphatic trunks? So we went from capillaries to lymphatic vessels, and then we have our trunks, then ducts. So we have lumbar, a pair in our lumbar. Where's lumbar? Okay? Bronchomediastinal. Okay? Subclavian. Underneath your clavicles. Jugular. Above. And intestinal. I feel like we went in the opposite direction there. Okay? So it goes capillaries, vessels, trunks, and then the last stop is the ducts. You have a right lymphatic duct and then a thoracic duct. The right lymphatic duct, the one on this side, will drain lymph from right here. The right arm and the head and neck. So right here is the right. The left duct does the rest of your whole body. So I feel like that's an uneven distribution of power, but that is right versus left. So, diagram showing you it will go capillaries, vessels, and then it will go into trunks. These are areas where there's a lot of cleansing going on. These right here are lymph nodes, so you have a whole bunch of lymph nodes. Okay, and it'll show you those throughout here. Then we get into areas where it gets thicker, where we have our trunks, and then we have our ducts. So here is left, here is right. The right is depicted in green, the left depicted in red, as far as where it receives lymph from. But both of these together, both of those trunks, turn into your superior vena cava. And where's your superior vena cava going to dump? To right atrium. So it goes from your lymph, gets filtered, I'm going to go back up here, gets filtered all the way up. So all of these lymph nodes are responsible for filtering. And we'll talk about how their structure carries out that function. But by the time they make it back, they have to be cleansed enough to go right back into the heart, into the blood. Okay? So I wanted you to see how that kind of ran together. Again, you can see the lymphatics running alongside the veins here, for sure. Questions so far?
Is it left or thorax?
Well, I called it left whenever I was pointing at the diagram, but it's technically called the thoracic duct. The right is called the right duct, and the left one is called the thoracic. It's totally makes sense all the time. All the time. Okay? How is lymph propelled? Is there a lymph pump? So what do we use to propel it? The muscular movements, the milking action, the respiratory movements, okay? All of that, and of course we'll also use gravity. There are valves there as well to prevent backflow, so very similar to what we see in the veins. Now the cells that we find in the lymphatics are called lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are a type of leukocyte. Okay, and I'm going to keep saying that because the more I say it, then you're going to hear it and be like, okay. For lymphocytes, we have two types. We have T cells, B cells. Again, I'm a memorizer, and I try to create relationships with the way I learn material. When I think of T cells, I think of no mercy. They are far above everyone else, and they directly kill. T cells are very specific. B cells are very general, and they create antibodies. So when you hear antibodies, those are B cells. Antibodies are B cells. Very strict cell-to-cell contact killers are my T cells. So two types of lymphocytes, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. T and B cells are responsible for protecting against antigens. Now, just a moment ago, I said the term pathogen. Pathogen is a disease-causing agent. But what's an antigen? It could be a bacteria. An antigen, by any definition, is it's foreign. So an antigen could be a bacteria, it could be a virus, but it could also be a secondary. Okay? When you say pathogen, it's a disease-causing agent. So pathogens are antigens, but are all antigens pathogens? No, and I just want you to hear those together because they are separated in these notes. I want you to understand that a pathogen causes diseases, okay, and an antigen is just considered foreign. So a lot of things could be an antigen, and not a lot of things can be pathogens, okay? And the T cells and B cells are responsible for responding to antigens. So that could involve pathogens, but it could also involve dirt, which would also be considered foreign. Anything, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Cannot, okay, so a pathogen can always be an antigen, but not all antigens are pathogens. Does that make sense? Okay, so anything that the body perceives as foreign would be considered an antigen. So it mentions bacteria, bacterial toxins, viruses, mixed match, red blood cells, cancer cells, anything foreign. Anything foreign is an antigen. T cells attack and destroy. B cells create antibodies. Okay? These are very direct and aggressive. These are more like the tattletales. B cells cannot directly kill. T cells can. B cells cannot directly kill. T cells can. But T cells are very specific. They can't just kill anything. They can only kill what they've been taught to kill. And we'll talk about that not today, but on the next lecture. When we talk about other lymphatic cells or lymphoid cells, we have macrophages, which you and I have discussed before. Macrophages engulf, and they will either destroy or present it to someone and say, hey, what is this? Or it's not supposed to be here. Dendritic cells we covered in 01 when we studied the integumentary system. Dendritic cells are the immune cells found in the skin. Dendritic cells are the immune cells found in the skin. Reticular, anytime we say reticular, that means deeper. So reticular cells are going to be cells found deep inside of lymphoid tissue. And I'll explain that when we get to lymph nodes. Okay, so just kind of showing you what a lymph node looks like on the inside, up close. You can see some fibers, some cells, a lot of things going on there. Lymphoid tissue. When you hear, and you're gonna hear this come up in other, especially when we talk about the respiratory system and the digestive system. We'll talk about lymphoid tissue. Pretty much all organs have some type of lymphoid tissue. Just logically speaking, why would all organs need or benefit from having lymphoid tissue? Yeah, so I'm in the liver and I see some things that are bad. I don't want to have to wait for something else. I have lymphoid tissue inside of me that says, hey, liver, this isn't supposed to be here. This is bad stuff. And it will help get rid of that. So when we talk about lymphoid tissues, we say that those are sites where cells, specifically lymphocytes, can proliferate. Let's talk about what the term proliferate means. When something's proliferating, what is it doing? Proliferation means it's reproducing. Proliferation means it's reproducing. So for example, if I'm just a lymphocyte and I'm in the liver and I find something that is bad and I recognize it as bad, I'm just me by myself because I've never been sick before. So in order to fight whatever's in the liver, I'm going to need to proliferate, or I'm going to need to reproduce in order to create more of me. Okay, so proliferation means that it is making more. And that applies to any science, anything like that. Proliferation means to create more. Lymphoid tissue also serves as a surveillance point, so sometimes your cells just kind of rest and hang out in various lymphoid tissue. There are two main types of connective tissue, diffuse lymphoid tissue and lymphoid follicles. So let's divide those up. Diffuse lymphoid tissue. It's found in pretty much every body organ, which is what I had just said. Okay? Why do you think I'm going to find more lymphoid tissue in areas that have mucous membranes? What is a mucous membrane used for? To catch stuff. Like your nose, your nasal cavity, all lined in mucous membranes. Your oral cavity, all lined in mucous membranes. So as you're breathing, the mucus catches stuff before it enters your body. So why is it beneficial to have lymphoid tissue there? To help get rid of it. Right? So I catch that bacteria, I catch that dirt, I catch those antigens before they become part of my systems. Lymphoid follicles are also what we call lymph nodes. So it says nodules here, or nodules, you can say it either way. They're solid spherical bodies of tightly packed lymphoid cells. It says they're germinal centers for proliferating B cells. Tell me what that means. This is where B cells have babies. Okay, proliferating B cells. Does it say T cells here? There's only one place where T cells mature, and that's going to be the thymus. T cells are named T cells because of the thymus. B cells can be in the lymph nodes. They can be pretty much anywhere. Okay, but T cells are very specific. Lymph nodes are a specific, a little nodule organ that helps to filter out lymph. We can find them pretty much near any body structure, but specifically they're near the body surface in the inguinal areas, which is here. So in your groin area, axillary, where's that? Your armpits, cervical regions of the body. here. These are the normal places that people are like, oh my gosh, I have a lump here. And they immediately think it's cancerous. And the best thing about lymph nodes is lymph nodes will swell as they're fighting. So you might feel fine, but the lymph node is enlarged because you're technically fighting something. But your lymph nodes in your body is so healthy that it's able to take care of it without making you sick. You will only know that it's a problem when you start to get sick. But a lot of people will feel like an enlarged lymph node and be like, oh my God, I think I'm getting cancer. And a lot of times it's just a lymph node that's enlarged, which means that your body was fighting something in that area for a little while. Okay, so again, this is the diagram showing you where you have lymph nodes. And anywhere that we have these little enlargements, you have tons of lymph nodes there. So that anywhere there, that lymph node may be enlarged. So it's not uncommon for like a little bump to pop up, and that's just a lymph node. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean it's cancer, although we are in a cancer generation. So it could be cancer. I don't want you to be like, oh, it's just a lymph node, I'm not going to go. You should go. Okay, don't be like, oh, it's nothing. What is the function of a lymph node? Well, it's to filter lymph. In the event that that lymph, when it's filtered, they find some type of antigen, it will then mount an immune response. Notice how this says immune response and not lymphatic response. So an immune response based on the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system does the work. It's the structure to mount an immune response. When we talk about the structure of a lymph node, we talk about it having a cortex and a medulla. What's the cortex going to be? Outside. And the medulla is always going to be the middle. Here it talks about it has a capsule and then trabeculae. What's trabeculae? The little weavingness. Okay? Inside, this is telling you what happens, and I'm going to show you a picture as well. But the cortex is where I will find B cells dividing. And the cortex is where I will find B cells dividing. In the deep cortex, kind of towards the medulla, I will start to see T cells, but it says T cells in transit. That is huge. Because the only time T cells are going to become developed or mature is going to be in the thymus. Okay? So if they're in a lymph node, they're not proliferating, that's all B cells in lymph nodes. Okay, they're in transit. T cells will continue to circulate continuously once they become immunocompetent. We'll talk about that. Okay, I love the structure of a lymph node. So this is a lymph node up close. I also appreciate the fact that there's arrows. So it's telling you that the lymph comes in like this, but it leaves like that. What can you tell me about the difference in how much is going in versus what's going out? There's a lot more coming in than there is going out. But why does this make sense? Like why? It's getting rid of a lot. Bless you. Okay, it's not getting rid of the bad stuff. Where's the pumping mechanism here? There's not one. There's no pumping mechanism. So if I have a whole lot coming in, I have this current coming in, and I only have a little bit coming out, that current is forcing it through all this filtering, and it's allowing it to get that work done. It's allowing it to filter. So we have more afferent vessels and fewer efferent. Do you remember what afferent means? It's going up, and efferent means it's going back down or going out. Okay? Here we have the cortex. You have the medulla inside. So we have our B cells proliferating and germinating here. T cells in transit. Okay? All of this, like this is just a cross-section, but this is technically all trabeculae. Like it's all woven, and it's little tunnels which allow for that filtering to take place. But far more pressure coming in than going out, and that's so that it has time to filter and do its job. What else can I point out here? I think that's it. The structure of a lymph node, I already mentioned the cortex versus the medulla. Lymphoid sinuses, I should have pointed that out here. Lymphoid sinuses, again, a sinus is just like an opening. Okay, not like a lumen, but it's like a collecting opening. So lymphoid sinuses here, like all this opening, these have macrophages. What are macrophages? They're cells that circulate and engulf things that they perceive to be antigens, anything that they perceive to be foreign. Okay, so the lymphoid sinuses contain macrophages. So I'll note up close. This is putting the words that I just said using that diagram. So you have your afferent lymphatic vessels coming in, efferent leaving, and why? We have fewer efferent vessels so that the flow is somewhat stagnant. And this allows for lymphocytes and macrophages to have time to function. It creates that pressure and gives them time to do what they need to do. Okay, so again, those two pictures put together. The spleen is the largest lymphoid organ, but it is an organ that you can do without because you have plenty of other lymph nodes that can function collaterally. What function does the spleen carry out? It's the site of lymphocyte proliferation and immune surveillance and response. What type of lymphocytes are proliferating here? Which ones are not? Very well. Okay, it also says that the spleen not only functions as part of the lymphatic system, but it's also responsible for cleansing out red blood cells. Old, broken down red blood cells, because remember they have a limited lifespan, and helping to remove debris. So good looking spleen there. Okay, additional functions of the spleen. Most of them are going to be a filtering function of the red blood cells, platelets, things that are coming out. It also mentions that it has a fibrous capsule. It has trabeculae as far as anatomy is concerned. Contains lymphocytes, macrophages, and erythrocytes. What are erythrocytes? Red blood cells. So, pretty much what we said on the previous slide as well. When we look at the spleen, there's a white pulp and a red pulp. Guess what the difference is? Yeah, one of them is red because it has erythrocytes, and one of them is white because it has lymphocytes, which are a type of leukocyte, type of white blood cell, yes. So look, you can see the white pulp, and then you can see the red pulp, okay? Does that make sense as far as what our distribution of red and white should be? We have far more red blood cells than we do white blood cells in a healthy person. Even in a sick person, we should still have more red than white, with just a whole lot more white when they're sick. The purpose of the thymus. First of all, the thymus here, and it, as you're a child, this thymus should be large, and it has a high activity level as you're growing and through your adolescent ages, so through teenage ages, and then kind of once you hit puberty and kind of plateau off, the thymus function slows down, and then it begins to atrophy with age. The thymus is so active when you're young because that's when you're coming into contact with things in your environment. If you stay in the same environment for your entire life, this pattern is the one that ensues. It's larger when you're little, it gets smaller as you age. But if you change your environment, and we discussed this in a previous lecture, you change your environment, you're changing what you're exposing yourself to, you're constantly building an immunity. So if you've lived in Waxahachie your whole life, there's only so many antigens that are here, that are native to this area. So after you build up an immunity to all of those, then your body won't have to keep fighting. It already knows and it has a memory to that. Now if you're constantly moving, the antigens here might be different than the native antigens in Florida or California or wherever it is that you move to. Okay, so it does mention that even though it begins to atrophy, and what does atrophy mean? It gets smaller. So if you don't use it, you lose it. It still produces immunocompetent cells. This is a huge term right here, immunocompetent. And we aren't going to discuss it until we get into our next lecture, but immunocompetent cells are a big deal. They have to be mature enough to carry out their immune system function. And this continues to talk about the structure of the thymus. So there's the cortex and a medulla, no surprise there. Okay? And specifically, what type of cells develop and mature in the thymus? T cells. Okay? The goal is also that the thymus functions to prevent autoimmunity. What is autoimmunity? Your body attacks itself. Your T cells are supposed to be run through a series of 2 tests before they're deemed immunocompetent. If they pass both those tests, you should never suffer from an autoimmune disease. But individuals who have an autoimmune disease, those T cells have failed one of those tests. And we will get into that when we talk in the next lecture. Okay, so we have the cortex, the medulla, normal structures that we expect to see here. Again, real quick, because you have the two T glands, the thyroid, the thymus. Thyroid, thymus. They're in reverse alphabetical order. Okay? The thymus does not have B cells. The thymus only takes care of T cells. Okay? And MALT tissue. MALT stands for mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. MALT tissue is located anywhere you have mucosa. And mucosa would be mucous membranes. And why would we have mucous membranes again? We're coming into contact with the environment, we're breathing. In some way there's an opening there. We want to have lymphoid tissue there so that whatever is caught in those mucous membranes can be taken in, filtered out, broken down, and removed. It says that we have the largest amount of MALT tissue, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, in our tonsils. Okay, so you have 4 sets of tonsils. Peyer's patches, which are your intestines, and your appendix, which is holding on to your large intestine. So those are the areas where we're going to get the most antigen exposure. Here gives you the 4 types of tonsils. So palatine tonsils, lingual tonsils, pharyngeal tonsils. This is also called your adenoid. Tubal tonsils. So a lot of tonsils. Real quick, I think this is what goes into it next. Yeah, how does a tonsil work? Remember how we talked about taste buds? How in order to taste something it had to fall into that little crypt? Okay, your tonsils have that same structure. So whenever something gets stuck to them, they force it down into these crypts where they die. So that's how your tonsils work, where it's exposed to those macrophages. So we want those antigens to be forced into those tonsillar crypts so that they can be removed by the lymphatic tissue from our body. Okay? If you don't have your tonsils, then it's not going to happen. But I will tell you this, that the tonsillar tissue is glandular, which means it has the ability to regenerate. So for example, I had my tonsils removed in 2nd grade, and they regenerate. So they do, so it's not uncommon. But the reason you had them removed in the first place is because when it did hold on to those antigens, they swelled up so big that they became an obstruction. So that could be environmental, atmospheric, it could have something to do with your age, it could have to do with that antigen. There's a lot of different triggers. But did they develop back immediately? The answer is no. It took years for that tonsil, because it's epithelial tissue, which is glandular. Glandular is epithelial regenerative capacity.
And then where are tonsil stones? Because that's the reason I have mine.
So tonsil stones are where that stuff gets stuck there. Like it doesn't filter out the way it's supposed to, it just sticks there. But eventually, you'll start to see little like buds of tonsils come back. Anyway, all right, Peyer's patches. Peyer's patches are associated with your intestines. So they're ultimately the lymphatic system embedded in your intestines. And that's because all of your food is exposed to the environment. There's tons of antigens that come in. Even like, for example, if you have a baby and it's your 4th kid, because if it was your 1st kid, this would never happen. But they drop their pacifier on the ground. If it was your 1st kid, you would pick it up, you'd run to the bathroom, you'd run it under hot water, you'd boil it, or don't, it's nasty. But if it's your 4th kid, they drop that pacifier. You already know. You're like, oh my God, you're crying. Pick it up, put it in your mouth. Because the Peyer's patches, eventually, when you swallow it and it makes it down to their digestive system, it actually builds their immune system. So by that time, you're a knowledgeable parent, and you understand that a little bit of dirt isn't going to kill your kid. And you'll find that your 4th kid will probably get less sick in comparison to your 1st kid, because you sterilize everything with your 1st kid. But those Peyer's patches are responsible for grabbing all of that stuff and taking out the things that aren't supposed to be there, and leaving, of course, the food. Okay, developmental aspects as far as your lymphatic system is concerned. You develop your lymphatic system in utero, but is your immune and lymphatic system fully functional at birth? No, and it continues to mature throughout life. So we'll actually talk about this in a lot more detail when we come back together Thursday In fact, your immune system is pretty vulnerable when you're first born, which is why we ask mothers or what's it called when you try to get somebody to do something, try to persuade mothers to breastfeed, because when you breastfeed, you're actually passing on your immunity to your child, so your child becomes less vulnerable to environmental factors, because their immune system is very vulnerable initially. Although they have the lymphatics, they have white blood cells and so on, they haven't been exposed to any of the environmental antigens that the mother has been exposed to. So it's very vulnerable early on, and of course, as you begin to age, it becomes more mature. All right, so we will, are the end of here. We'll just stop here.